Lucas Morgan stared at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting the blue tie that felt like it was choking him. At 10 years old, he had never worn a suit before, and today of all days, he had to wear one. His mother Catherine had picked it out specially for her wedding day, a day Lucas had been dreading for months. "Lucas, are you ready? We need to leave in 20 minutes. Catherine called from downstairs. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the photograph on his bedside table. It showed him sitting on his father's shoulders at the beach, both of them laughing. The picture was taken just 3 months before the car accident that took his father away forever. That was 2 years ago, but to Lucas, it still felt like yesterday. Catherine appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her simple white dress. She wasn't wearing her wedding gown yet, that was waiting at the venue. "You look so handsome," she said softly, "just like your dad." Lucas turned away. "Why are we doing this? Why do you have to marry James?" Catherine sighed and sat on the edge of his bed. This wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. "Because I love him, honey. And I think, if you gave him a chance, you might like him too." "I already had a dad," Lucas mumbled. "Yes, you did. And nothing will ever change that." Catherine touched the photograph gently. "Your father would want us to be happy, Lucas." But Lucas wasn't convinced. James had appeared in their lives only 18 months after his father died. He was tall and always smiling, bringing gifts and trying to talk about baseball with Lucas. But Lucas saw through it all. James was trying to replace his dad, and Lucas wouldn't let that happen. "He doesn't even know which team I like," Lucas said. "Because you never talk to him, sweetie. How can he know you if you don't let him?" Lucas shrugged and turned back to the mirror. He didn't want to argue today. It would only make his mother cry, and he hated seeing her cry. In the car ride to the wedding venue, Lucas sat silently in the back seat while his Aunt Megan chatted excitedly with his mother. The garden where the ceremony would take place was 30 minutes away, and Lucas watched the familiar neighborhood fade into the distance. "I hear James has a surprise for you after the honeymoon," Aunt Megan said to Lucas, trying to include him in the conversation. "I don't want any surprises from him," Lucas replied, looking out the window. Catherine caught his eye in the rearview mirror, and Lucas could see the hurt in her face. He felt bad but couldn't stop himself. Every time someone mentioned James or the wedding, anger bubbled up inside him like a volcano ready to explode. When they arrived at the garden, it was already filled with flowers and white chairs. A small group of people, friends and family, were setting up the final decorations. James was there too, directing some men where to place the large flower arrangements. "Remember, you'll walk with me down the aisle and then stand with Uncle Rob," Catherine reminded Lucas as they headed toward the preparation room. Lucas nodded, but inside his head, a different plan was forming. He didn't know exactly what he would do yet, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let this wedding happen without making his feelings known. As he followed his mother into the building, Lucas spotted James looking their way. James smiled and waved at him. Lucas turned away, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and something else he couldn't quite name, something that felt strangely like guilt. 3 weeks before the wedding, Lucas found himself alone in the house. His mother had gone to her final dress fitting with Aunt Megan, and Lucas was supposed to be at his friend Tyler's house. But when Tyler got sick, Lucas returned home to an empty house. "Great, now I'm stuck here all afternoon," he muttered to himself, tossing his backpack onto the couch. Lucas wandered around the quiet house, bored and restless. He decided to look for his baseball card collection, which he hadn't seen in months. Maybe it was in the attic with the rest of his dad's things. The pull-down ladder to the attic creaked as Lucas climbed up. The space was dusty and filled with boxes, most of them sealed with tape and labeled in his mother's neat handwriting: David's clothes, David's books, family photos. Lucas felt a lump in his throat seeing his father's name written everywhere. He spotted his baseball gear in the corner and headed toward it. As he moved a heavy box aside, another smaller box stumbled over, spilling its contents across the wooden floor. Old envelopes scattered everywhere. "Mom's going to be mad if I don't clean this up," Lucas thought, kneeling down to gather the letters. That's when he noticed something strange. The letters were addressed to his father, but from someone named Jay. The handwriting looked oddly familiar. Curious, Lucas opened one envelope dated from 15 years ago. "Dear David," the letter began. "College won't be the same without my roommate and best friend. I still can't believe we survived 4 years together without killing each other. Remember when we flooded the dormitory trying to create that rain machine for science class? Lucas's heart began to race. He quickly opened another letter, this one more recent. I can't believe you're a father now. Little Lucas sounds amazing. Catherine must be so proud. I wish I could visit sooner, but this architecture project in Japan won't let me leave for another 6 months. Save some of that famous barbecue for me when I finally make it back to the States. Lucas's hands trembled as he realized what he was reading. These letters were from James. James had known his father. They weren't just acquaintances. According to these letters, they had been best friends for decades. At the bottom of the pile, Lucas found an envelope that looked newer than the others. The letter inside was written on hospital stationery. With shaking hands, he unfolded it. Dear Jay, his father had written in weak, shaky handwriting. The doctors say I don't have much time left. The cancer has spread too far. I'm writing to ask you one last favor, old friend. If anything happens to me, please look out for Catherine and Lucas. They'll need someone strong to lean on. I know you've always had feelings for Catherine, even back in college. I'm not blind, buddy. I've seen how you look at her. But you were always respectful, and I love you for that. If someday something happens between you two, you have my blessing. Just promise me you'll love my son like your own. He's going to need a father figure. There's no one I trust more than you. Your brother in everything but blood, David. Lucas sat on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by letters, tears streaming down his face. His whole world had just shifted beneath him. James wasn't some stranger trying to replace his dad. James was his father's best friend, keeping a promise. But why had they kept this from him? Why hadn't his mother or James ever told him they knew each other before? Had they been lying to him all this time? Lucas carefully returned the letters to the box, his mind racing with questions. As he heard his mother's car pulling into the driveway, he made a decision. He wouldn't confront them yet. First, he needed to know more. Lucas couldn't sleep that night. The letters he found kept playing in his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. By morning, he had made a plan. He would investigate James and find out everything he could about the man who was about to become his stepfather. Lucas started his mission the next day after school. While his mother prepared dinner, he carefully went through the photo albums in the living room bookshelf. He had looked at these albums hundreds of times before, but now he was searching with new eyes. In the back of one album, tucked behind family vacation photos, Lucas found what he was looking for. A picture of two young men standing in front of a college building, arms around each other's shoulders. One was clearly his father. The other, a younger, thinner version of James. Lucas, dinner's ready. His mother called from the kitchen. Coming, he answered, quickly putting the album back. During dinner, Lucas watched James carefully. The man seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone and barely touching his food. Is everything okay with the wedding plans? Catherine asked James, noticing his distraction. Oh, yes, everything's fine, James replied quickly. Just some issues with a client's building design. Nothing to worry about. Lucas narrowed his eyes. Was James hiding something more? The next day, Lucas decided to visit his father's old friend, Mr. Peterson, who lived down the street. Mr. Peterson had known his dad since high school and might have information about James. Well, hello there, young man, Mr. Peterson said when he opened the door. What brings you here today? I was wondering if you could tell me about my dad's friend James, Lucas said directly. Mr. Peterson invited him in, offering a glass of lemonade. James Carter? Of course I remember him. Your dad and James were inseparable in college. They even started a small construction business together before James moved away to study architecture. They were business partners. Lucas asked, surprised. For a few years, yes. James was devastated when they had to split up the company, but your dad understood James needed to follow his dream in the big city. This was all new information to Lucas. He spent almost an hour listening to Mr. Peterson's stories about his father and James, how they once built a treehouse for the neighborhood kids, how they took a road trip across the country on motorcycles, how James was the best man at his parents' wedding. On his way home, Lucas took a detour to the baseball field where his team practiced. Coach Miller was setting up equipment for the afternoon session. Coach, can I ask you something? Lucas approached hesitantly. Sure. What's up? Coach Miller replied. Did you know that James paid for my baseball camp last summer? Coach Miller looked surprised. How did you find out about that? It was supposed to be anonymous. So it's true? Lucas pressed. Coach sighed. Yes, it's true. Your mom couldn't afford the camp that year, but James called me and arranged everything. He made me promise not to tell anyone. He said you deserved to go to camp with your friends. Lucas felt confused. Why would James do that and not want credit for it? That weekend, while his mother was shopping for wedding decorations, Lucas found himself alone with James. They were in the backyard, James fixing the broken step on the deck, something Lucas's dad had always meant to do, but never got around to before he got sick. Lucas watched James work, gathering his courage. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you tell me you knew my dad? James froze, hammer in midair. Slowly, he put the tool down and turned to face Lucas. Who told you that? He asked quietly. Nobody told me. I found the letters in the attic, Lucas admitted. You were his best friend. You were the best man at his wedding. You built a company together. Why did you and Mom lie to me? James looked at Lucas with sad eyes, then sat down on the half-fixed step, patting the space beside him. Lucas hesitated before sitting down, keeping some distance between them. We didn't lie to you, Lucas, James said softly. We just didn't know how to tell you. It's complicated. Lucas crossed his arms. Try me. I'm not a baby. James nodded slowly, looking out across the yard as if deciding where to begin. Lucas waited, his heart pounding, knowing that whatever James said next would change everything. James took a deep breath and looked directly at Lucas. Your father was the best man I ever knew, he began. We met on our first day of college when we were assigned as roommates. For 20 years, he was like a brother to me. Lucas stared at the ground, kicking at a small rock with his shoe. Then why did you hide it? Why didn't you tell me when you started dating Mom? James ran a hand through his hair. I was afraid, Lucas. Afraid you would think I was only here because of a promise I made to your dad. I wanted you to get to know me as just James, not as your dad's friend who felt obligated to step in. Were you? Just keeping a promise? Lucas asked, finally looking up at James. No, James said firmly. I love your mother, Lucas. I always have, even back in college, but she chose your father, and he was my best friend. I respected that and moved away to build my own life. Then why come back now? After your father's funeral, your mom called me a few months later just to talk. She was struggling with fixing things around the house, and I offered to help. One thing led to another, and James trailed off. I didn't plan it, Lucas. Neither of us did. Lucas absorbed this information silently. All this time, he'd imagined James as an intruder, someone trying to erase his father's memory. But now he was seeing a different picture. I have his letter, you know, James said quietly. The one from the hospital. I keep it in my wallet. He pulled out his wallet and showed Lucas a worn, folded piece of paper. I read it every day to remind myself of the promise I made. Not just to look after you both, but to try to make you happy. For the next week, Lucas watched James and his mother with new eyes. He noticed how James always made sure his mother took her coffee before making his own, how he remembered which nights Lucas had baseball practice without being reminded, how he kept a small photo of Lucas's father on his desk at home. The night before the wedding, Lucas couldn't sleep. His mind was spinning with everything he had learned. In his investigation, he had discovered much more than he expected. James wasn't trying to replace his father, he was trying to honor him. Lucas got out of bed and turned on his desk lamp. He took out a piece of paper and a pen and began to write. He crossed out words, rewrote sentences, and finally, after almost an hour, he had a note that said exactly what he wanted to express. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in the pocket of his suit jacket hanging on his closet door. Then he made a decision that both terrified and excited him. The wedding was set for noon the next day. Most kids would just sit quietly through the ceremony, but Lucas knew he couldn't do that. Not anymore. He had to do something to acknowledge the truth he had discovered. A truth that had changed how he felt about everything. Lucas looked at the clock. 1:23 a.m. In less than 12 hours, his mother would be getting married. And he now knew exactly what he was going to do. Morning came quickly. The house was filled with activity as relatives arrived to help Catherine get ready. Aunt Megan was directing everyone like a general, making sure every detail was perfect. "Where's Lucas?" Catherine asked, looking around the crowded living room. "He's in his room getting dressed," Aunt Megan replied. "Don't worry about him. I checked on him 10 minutes ago." In his bedroom, Lucas stood in front of the mirror again, just as he had weeks before. But this time, he was adjusting his tie with care, making sure it was straight. He patted the pocket of his jacket, feeling the folded note inside. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the paper. What he was planning would surprise everyone at the wedding. His mother might be upset at first. The guests would definitely be shocked. But Lucas knew it was the right thing to do. As he heard Aunt Megan calling his name, Lucas took one last look at his father's photograph on the bedside table. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Dad," he whispered. Then, with a deep breath, he opened his bedroom door and walked downstairs to join the wedding party, his decision now firm in his mind. The garden where the wedding was held looked like something from a fairy tale. White chairs lined both sides of a flower-covered aisle. An arch made of roses and lilies stood at the front, with the bright blue sky as its background. A small string quartet played soft music as guests found their seats. Lucas stood near the garden entrance, watching everyone arrive. His palms were sweaty and his heart beat fast. Uncle Rob, who was supposed to be watching him, was busy greeting guests. "You look very handsome today," said Mrs. Wilson, his mother's friend from work, as she passed by. Lucas managed a small smile and tugged at his collar. The note in his pocket felt heavy, like it was made of stone instead of paper. Inside the bridal suite, Catherine was getting her final touches done. Lucas had seen her briefly that morning, but now she was in her full wedding dress with her hair and makeup complete. "It's almost time," Aunt Megan announced, checking her watch. "Lucas, you'll walk with your mother down the aisle, remember? Then go stand next to Uncle Rob." Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mother looked at him with concern. "Are you feeling okay, honey?" she asked, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "Just nervous," Lucas replied. Catherine knelt down carefully in her wedding dress, taking his hands in hers. "I know this is a big change, Lucas, but I promise, we're still going to be a family. Nothing will change how much I love you." Lucas bit his lip. If only she knew what he was planning to do. The music changed, signaling it was time to begin. Aunt Megan lined up the bridesmaids, gave everyone a final check, and then opened the garden doors. James was already standing at the front with the minister. He looked nervous but happy, smiling at the guests. When he saw Lucas walking beside Catherine, his smile grew even wider. Each step down the aisle felt longer than the last to Lucas. The guests were all watching, some wiping away tears as they saw Catherine in her beautiful dress. Lucas concentrated on not tripping over his own feet. When they reached the front, Catherine kissed Lucas on the cheek and whispered, "Go stand with Uncle Rob now." Lucas moved to the side as instructed, but his eyes remained fixed on James. The minister began the ceremony with words about love and commitment. Lucas barely heard any of it. His mind was focused on the moment that was coming. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot be lawfully joined together in matrimony, the minister said, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was it, the moment Lucas had been waiting for. Before anyone could react, Lucas stepped forward into the center of the aisle. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. James froze, confusion written across his face. "Lucas," Uncle Rob whispered urgently, trying to pull him back. But Lucas stood firm. The entire garden fell silent, everyone staring at the small boy in the blue suit who had just interrupted the wedding ceremony. Lucas walked toward James with steady steps. His legs felt like jelly, but somehow they carried him forward. He could feel everyone's eyes following him, could hear the whispers beginning to spread through the crowd. What is he doing? Oh my goodness, is he objecting? Poor Catherine. His mother looked like she might faint. Her face had gone completely white, and Aunt Megan was already moving to support her. James looked equally shocked but remained still, watching Lucas approach. When Lucas reached James, he had to tilt his head back to look up at the tall man. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, slowly, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note. He held it out to James with a slightly trembling hand. James glanced at Catherine, who appeared frozen in place, then back at Lucas. Slowly, he knelt down so they were at eye level and took the note from Lucas's hand. The garden was so quiet you could hear the paper as James unfolded it. Every guest leaned forward in their seats, straining to see what was happening. No one dared to speak. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. James looked at the note, then at Lucas. Whatever was written, there remained a secret between them for that suspended moment in time, as everyone held their breath to see what would happen next. James's hands trembled as he unfolded the note. The garden remained deadly silent. Even the birds seemed to have paused their singing to witness this moment. Catherine stood frozen by the altar, her wedding dress sparkling in the sunlight, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. James's eyes moved across the paper, reading the words Lucas had so carefully written the night before. At first, his expression remained tense, but then something changed. His eyes widened. His shoulders relaxed. And then, to everyone's surprise, tears began to form in his eyes. Large droplets rolled down James's cheeks as he looked up from the paper to Lucas's face. The boy stood there, small but determined, watching James' reaction carefully. "Lucas," James whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Without warning, James pulled Lucas into a tight hug, the note still clutched in his hand. The guests murmured in confusion. This was not the reaction anyone had expected to a child objecting at his mother's wedding. Catherine rushed forward, her dress rustling as she moved. "What's happening?" "Lucas, what did you do?" Her voice was tight with worry. James stood up, wiping tears from his face, and handed her the note. "Read it," he said gently. Catherine took the paper with shaking hands and began to read. Like James, her expression transformed as she processed the words. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she too began to cry. "May I?" the minister asked, gesturing toward the note. Catherine nodded and handed it to him. The minister cleared his throat and turned to address the confused guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "with the family's permission, I would like to share what young Lucas has written." He adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "Dear James, I know you were Dad's best friend. I found the letters in the attic. I know Dad asked you to take care of us in his last letter from the hospital. I was angry because I thought you were trying to replace him, but now I understand. Thank you for fixing the roof when it leaked. Thank you for paying for my baseball camp when Mom couldn't afford it. Thank you for making Mom smile again. Dad chose you to be here for us. I think he would be happy that we're becoming a family. I'm sorry I was mean to you. Please be my dad now too. Love, Lucas." A collective "oh" swept through the garden. Several guests stabbed at their eyes. Aunt Megan was openly sobbing into her handkerchief. James knelt down again to Lucas's level. "Are you sure about this, buddy? This is a big step." Lucas nodded. "I'm sure. Dad picked you for a reason." "I'm not trying to replace your father," James said softly. "No one could ever do that." "I know," Lucas replied. "But maybe I have room for two dads, one in heaven and one here with us." Catherine joined them, kneeling awkwardly in her wedding dress, forming a small circle away from the watching crowd. "Lucas, why didn't you tell me you found those letters?" "I was confused," Lucas admitted. "I needed time to figure things out." "And you chose our wedding day to tell us?" she asked, half laughing, half crying. Lucas shrugged. It seemed like the right moment. James laughed and ruffled Lucas's hair. "You definitely have a flair for drama, just like your dad." The minister approached them gently. "Should we continue with the ceremony?" he asked. James looked at Lucas. "What do you think? Is it okay if I marry your mom now?" Lucas nodded, a real smile spreading across his face for the first time in months. "Yes, but I have one condition." "What's that?" James asked. "I want to stand next to you during the ceremony, not on the side with Uncle Rob." James glanced at Catherine, who nodded through her tears. "I think that can be arranged," he said. As the small family rose to their feet, the entire garden burst into applause. What had begun as a moment of shocking interruption had transformed into something beautiful, a boy's acceptance of his new family and the honoring of his father's final wish. The minister returned to his place, and James extended his hand to Lucas. Together, they walked back to the altar, ready to continue the ceremony, not as strangers brought together by circumstance, but as a family united by love and the blessing of a father who had planned for their happiness even after he was gone. The ceremony resumed with Lucas standing proudly between his mother and James. The minister, still wiping away tears, continued with the vows. But before James and Catherine could exchange rings, James raised his hand, asking for a moment to speak. "If you don't mind," he said to the minister, "there's something I need to say." He turned to face the guests, his arm now resting gently on Lucas's shoulder. "Most of you know me as the man who came into Catherine and Lucas's lives 2 years ago. But what many of you don't know, what I chose not to share until now, is that David Morgan was my best friend for over 20 years. A wave of whispers passed through the crowd. Many guests looked at each other in surprise. Even Catherine's parents, seated in the front row, appeared shocked by this information. "David and I met on our first day of college," James continued. "We shared a tiny dorm room with a window that never closed properly. We stayed up all night talking about our dreams, our fears, and the futures we imagined for ourselves." Lucas looked up at James, watching him speak about his father with such fondness. For the first time, he could see his father through someone else's eyes, not just as his dad, but as a friend, a college student, a young man with dreams. "When David met Catherine," James went on, "he called me at 3 in the morning to tell me he found the woman he was going to marry. And he was right. I watched them build a beautiful life together, and I was honored when they asked me to be Lucas's godfather." At this, Catherine gasped. She turned to James with wide eyes. "You're his godfather? But we never had a christening. We just talked about it before." Her voice trailed off. James nodded. "David and I signed the papers at the hospital the day Lucas was born. He wanted to make it official right away, just in case. That was David, always planning ahead." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she realized how much had been kept from her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "After David died, I stayed away because I was heartbroken too. I had lost my best friend. And then, when we reconnected at the funeral, I was afraid to tell you the whole truth. I was afraid you would think I was only reaching out because of my promise to David, not because I truly cared for you both." James looked out at the guests again. "I kept my connection to David a secret because I wanted Lucas to accept me for who I am now, not who I was to his father. I didn't want him to feel like I was trying to replace David. And I didn't want Catherine to feel obligated to welcome me into their lives because of an old promise." Uncle Rob stepped forward from his place by the altar. "I knew," he admitted. "David told me about making James your godfather, Lucas. He made me promise not to say anything unless—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Unless something happened to him," James completed softly. The garden fell silent as everyone absorbed this revelation. Lucas felt a strange sense of peace washing over him. The puzzle pieces were finally fitting together. "When Lucas found those letters," James continued, "I realized we had made a mistake by keeping the truth from him. Children understand more than we give them credit for." He knelt down in front of Lucas. "I'm sorry we didn't tell you sooner. Your dad was the best person I ever knew, and I promise I will never let you forget him or the kind of man he was." "Did you really build a ray machine in college?" Lucas asked, remembering the letter he had read. James laughed, surprised. "Yes, we did. It flooded the entire dormitory. We had to clean carpets for a month as punishment." For the first time, Lucas could picture his father as a young man, making mistakes, laughing, living a life before he became dad. It made him feel closer to his father, not further away. Catherine took James's hand. "No more secrets," she said firmly. "From now on, we honor David's memory together as a family." James nodded, relief washing over his face. "No more secrets," he agreed. The minister, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward again. "Shall we continue with the rings?" As the ceremony proceeded, Lucas felt something new in his heart, not the anger or confusion that had been his companions for so long, but understanding. His father had not been replaced. Instead, his father's love continued to protect and guide their family, even now, through the friend he had trusted most in the world. The reception was held in the same garden, now transformed with twinkling lights and round tables covered in white cloths. A small band played soft music as guests mingled, still buzzing about the emotional ceremony they had witnessed. Lucas sat at the main table between his mother and James, picking at a slice of wedding cake. Every few minutes, Another guest would approach to ruffle his hair or tell him how brave he had been. Lucas wasn't sure if he liked all the attention, but he smiled politely as his mother had taught him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "it's time for the first dance between our newlyweds." James stood and offered his hand to Catherine. She looked beautiful as she rose from her chair, her wedding dress catching the light from the lanterns hanging in the trees. They moved to the center of the dance floor, and the band began playing a slow song. As they danced, Lucas noticed how happy his mother looked. Her smile was bigger and more real than he had seen in a long time. James whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, and Lucas felt a warmth spread through his chest. Maybe this new family could work after all. After their dance ended, James walked directly to Lucas's chair. The music continued playing as James extended his hand. "May I have this dance with my new son?" he asked formally, but with a small wink. Lucas hesitated, suddenly shy with everyone watching, but then he took James's hand and followed him to the dance floor. James placed his hands on Lucas's shoulders while Lucas awkwardly put his hands on James's arms, unsure of where they should go. "Just follow my lead," James said quietly. "Your dad was a terrible dancer too, you know. He stepped on your mom's feet 3 times during their first dance." Lucas laughed, surprising himself. "Really?" "Oh, yes. We had to practice for weeks before the wedding. I still have a video of us practicing in our apartment." He kept tripping over the coffee table. As they moved slowly to the music, Lucas felt less self-conscious. "Do you have other videos of my dad?" he asked hopefully. "Dozens," James replied. "And photos from college, camping trips, even our motorcycle journey across the country. I've kept everything. I'd like to show them to you someday, if you want." "I'd like that," Lucas said softly. The song ended, and Catherine joined them on the dance floor. She knelt down and hugged Lucas tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in his ear. When the dancing continued, Lucas found himself surrounded by relatives who wanted to speak with him. His grandfather, his father's father, approached with tears in his eyes. "I knew about James and your father being friends," he admitted. "Your grandmother and I were surprised when your mother started dating him, but we understood why David would have wanted it this way. Your father always said James was the most loyal person he ever knew." Later in the evening, as the celebration continued, James called for everyone's attention. He held a small box in his hands. "Lucas," he said, "I have something for you. It belonged to your father." Lucas approached, curious. James opened the box to reveal a beautiful silver watch with a brown leather strap. "Your dad received this watch from his father when he turned 18, James explained. "He wore it every day until—" He paused, collecting himself. "Until he got sick. He asked me to keep it safe for you until you were older. But I think today is the right day to give it to you." The watch was much too big for Lucas's small wrist, but James helped him fasten it anyway. "You'll grow into it," he said. "And until then, it can be a reminder that some bonds last forever, even when people are no longer with us." That night, after all the guests had gone and the garden was quiet once more, the new family of 3 stood together looking up at the stars. Lucas held his mother's hand on one side, and after a moment's hesitation, reached for James's hand on the other. "Do you think Dad can see us?" Lucas asked, his eyes fixed on the brightest star above them. "I know he can," Catherine said softly. "And I think he's smiling," James added. As they walked back to the car together, Lucas felt different than he had that morning. The anger that had lived inside him for so long was fading, replaced by something new: hope. His family didn't look the same as before, but it was still his family, and now it was even bigger, with new stories to learn and memories to make. The silver watch felt heavy on his wrist, but he didn't mind. It was a connection to his father, a bridge between his past and his future. And for the first time in 2 years, Lucas Morgan felt like everything might be okay after all.